Ever since Russia started fighting in Syria's civil war 2 years ago, it's been bringing the world's media down to demonstrate how well the campaign is going. And most tours begin on this tarmac. This is Russia's airbase near the coastal city of Latakia. Over a week, journalists would crisscross Syria, never knowing where they're flying to. But day one almost always begins with bombing missions against ISIS targets. The heat from the engines, the sound, all of it is intense. One Russian officer boasted to us, "Now you can feel Russia's power." After 6 years of brutality, destruction, and incalculable suffering, Syria's civil war has reached a turning point. The Islamic State is nearing defeat. Russia is trying to regain its status as a key power in the Middle East, and it wants the world to give it credit for the victory. At the peak of its influence, some 10 million people lived under the control of the Islamic State in Syria and next door in Iraq. But now, ISIS has been pushed back far into Syria's eastern desert. The front line is now near Deir ez-Zor, and the military was eager to get journalists there. Deir ez-Zor had been surrounded by ISIS forces for 3 years. It took humanitarian airdrops to prevent tens of thousands of people from starving to death. Syrian government troops, with Russian help, finally broke through to relieve the siege just a few days before our group arrived. Russia is a friend, a very, very good friend. We like Russia. We respect and appreciate them, this storekeeper told reporters. It wasn't only Russia that wanted to liberate Deir ez-Zor. Beyond those hills, the opposition Free Syrian Army and militias backed by the United States are also racing to get here. Nearby are Syria's main oil fields, a source of wealth for whoever controls them. The battlefield in Syria is immensely complicated. There are Syrian government troops, government opponents, Islamic groups, and many militias, all of which are backed by different foreign powers: the United States, Iran, Turkey, and Russia. For now, there is a general agreement not to attack each other, but instead to focus on defeating the Islamic State. It's overwhelming to see how 6 years of civil war has ruined this country. The destruction of the historic city of Aleppo is catastrophic, but the obliteration is absolutely everywhere. In Aleppo's town square, which saw only minimal fighting, posters of dictator Bashar al-Assad were among the first things to be restored. Workers were also tiling, but a reconstruction job so immense requires billions of dollars from the world's richest economies. And as long as Assad remains in power with Russian support, those countries have shown no interest in moving beyond humanitarian work. A stop at a Syrian school appeared to suggest Vladimir Putin's government is helping Syrian children and their teachers. But precisely how was never made clear. There were no fact sheets, no background briefings. Nor was there much time to talk to Syrians. Almost by accident, journalists found out that this teacher had lost her leg, and 9 children at the school died when a rocket hit the building. The unrelenting pace of the trip ensured a lot of smiling faces appeared on camera, but the smiles were missing context. The tour did show some examples of Russians helping civilians. Outside Homs, for example, Russian aid trucks showed up and people on both opposition and government sides were able to get food. Arguably, such scenes are aimed as much at Russians back home as the international community. Polls suggest that the Russian public is at best lukewarm to the idea of being in Syria. Russia's government may want to keep its ally in Syria in power to enhance its influence in the Middle East, but a lot of Russians remember that their military got bogged down in Afghanistan in the 1980s. They worry that Syria might be a commitment that never ends. With a trip deep into the desert to the just liberated town of Akrabat, the tour returned to a military theme. 10,000 people once lived here, but the place is now deserted. How many people were executed in this Sharia courthouse that the Russians showed off? It was never said, nor was how many Russian bombs fell on this place. The alleged bombing of civilians is likely the most contentious issue of Russia's participation in this conflict. Russia faced international outrage when East Aleppo was bombed in 2016, but denied its planes targeted civilians, only insurgents. It was a claim that much of the world scoffed at. On this trip, Russian military leaders echoed similar denials of civilian victims, but it was impossible to verify anything. Standing in what used to be an ISIS tank factory, the Russian general announced the final phase of the war would be to hunt down and kill as many ISIS militants as possible. Many ISIS fighters, in fact, come from Russia's Caucasus region, so it's better to hunt them down in Syria than hunt them down at home. The biggest takeaway after watching Russia's military operation for a week is that ISIS, as a caliphate, appears to be on its last legs. But even without territory, ISIS could remain a dangerous terrorist organization as it was at the start of this conflict. Russian air power, including cruise missiles fired at sea, and know-how on the ground, has made the decisive difference in this conflict. But the many grievances with the Assad regime that led the different factions to go to war in the first place remain unresolved. The defeat of ISIS will not heal Syria. Chris Brown, CBC News in Moscow.